Morning, everyone. That sounded very echoey. Yeah. Yeah. Do we have any apologies, Katie? It is definitely echoing. So,
Councillor Rouse.
our apologies. Trustee's not too worried. Minutes of the previous meeting, all received. Everyone content that they are a true record? Agreed. Thank you very much. Matters arising. I can update you on a couple of things. Standing orders relating to contracts were raised. Director of Finance and Assets advised that the number of waivers and exemptions alongside details and rationale will be regularly reported in future within the performance management reports from this year onwards. So we're content with that. Health and Safety Annual Report normally include an appendix that compared health and safety performance against 11 other family groups, but the MHCLG didn't release the data in time for that last meeting. This has now subsequently been shared with members. And a member would also like to see a report showing what progress the service had made in relation to the FBU improvement agenda. You will find that on today's agenda at, I think, item 13. So we'll consider that later. I think that was it there. Do we have any disclosures of interest? Other than, I just point out that we have an item on the agenda regarding member scheme of allowances, and neither discussing or approving the scheme of allowances or approving the precept, which is also on the agenda, gives rise to disclosable pecuniary interest. And now, Chairman's announcements. I'm surprised to see that despite the fact that we have just paid out a fortune to give them all nice new shirts, our officers are still wearing the white ones. Because that was going to be the first thing. This came from a feedback from a people survey where staffs wanted improved quality, comfort and identity. And I have to say, having seen them, I think that absolutely is delivered. I think the new shirts, particularly the large badge, fire service badge on the new shirt, which gives a strong identity for our employees, is excellent. And I look forward to seeing the models among the leadership team displaying them in future. So is this your last time you'll have to wear a bright new white shirt, Doug? Yeah. So I'm sure that this is a change for the better, definitely. Also mentioned something interestingly. I know last week at the executive meeting, Councillor Rouse had to leave early because he was preparing for an item to do with National Apprenticeships Week, and in fact we've been very involved ourselves with that. It runs from the 9th to the 15th, so that's all this week. And if you've been in Stocklake this week, you would see it was being celebrated with cake. Always a good way to celebrate something, I think, with cake. 10 years of apprenticeships within our organisation, and there's quite a range of activities being organised, and to recognise the contribution apprentices have made and continue to make to our workforce and the communities that we serve. The Director of People, Ronnie, who's here today, has been organising a vlog through the week. There was a careers event at High Wycombe on Tuesday, and Brew with the Crew session with cohort 14 joining us in April. So a slightly delayed celebration in that sense. alongside these events, there's extensive engagement through social media, showcasing apprentice journeys, past and present, including our first firefighter apprentices. Where are they now? Where indeed? Training diaries, key milestones, award nominations, and some of our apprentices' biggest achievements are all being celebrated through our social media links. This week is an opportunity to reflect on the impact apprenticeships have had over the past decade, to celebrate our success and reaffirm our commitment to developing our own talent for the future. I think we've done a great deal to support the idea of the apprenticeship week, and continue to do so. A quick update on Westgate Centre. Previously, we advised that the determination deadline for the planning application was 2nd of February, but a badger has popped up and said, "Oh, hang about." So determination has now been delayed until the end of March. I have spoken to the corporate director responsible and to representatives of the venture park. We're doing all we can to encourage us to come forward, but those of you who are involved with planning, members who are involved with planning, will appreciate that there are statutory requirements, and there's not a great deal we can do unless the badger tells us that it'll be fine. So one other thing to mention, I think certainly those of you in the south of the county have expressed concerns in other fora about the increasing number of solar farms, and certainly that's happening right on my doorstep. People are concerned about fire risks, particularly with battery energy storage systems and large data centers, which we're seeing applications for in the south. Later today, I'm traveling up to Manchester for a conference that is on today for professionals, and tomorrow for planners and authority members, to discuss the hazard impacts of all of these matters. So I hope to come back much better informed, and I'll pass on to particularly the planning members any things that I pick up that might be helpful for the future when we're considering applications for this. And I was able, we have a 2,000-acre solar farm coming up at the Claydons, and I was able to update local members there at a meeting a couple of days ago that we are very much, we have 2 employees at the conference today, and as I say, I'll be there tomorrow, so we couldn't be more on the ball with that. So that's me done. Do we have any petitions, Katie? Item 6.
None, Chairman.
Thank you. Do I have any questions under Standing Order 7087?
None, Chairman.
Thank you. So we move on to recommendations from committees. The Executive Committee on the 4th of February. First of all, the recommendations for the medium-term financial plan. And I would mention that when after this has been presented, we come to vote on it, it does require a recorded vote. That's a statutory requirement for this. So moving on to that, I think is Mark or Asif going to be presenting through Nicknam first to introduce.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to introduce the plan, and technically Mark will go through it, obviously. This paper sets out the proposed revenue budget and capital programme through to 2030-31. And the MFTP closely links to the Service New Community Risk Management Plan, PRIMP 2025-2030, which I emphasise went live on the 1st of April 2025. In September 2025, the committee was advised that a review was being undertaken as to how funding was allocated across local government, known as the Fair Funding Review. I think we're all aware of that. At the time, specific allocations were unknown, and the committee was presented with the outputs of two independent models that gave an indication of the range of possible outcomes. Allocations to individual services weren't published until the provisional settlement on the 17th of December 2025. Although the allocations were at the least worst end of the model scenarios, they still show a significant decrease in non-council tax funding allocated to the service over the next 3 years, from 12 million in 2025-26 to just 9.7 million in 2028-29. The decrease is driven by adjustment to the service funding need-based on a notional level of council tax. To fully offset the decrease in non-council tax funding would require an increase in council tax of £9.46. However, the core referendum limit for fire and rescue services is £5. For us, although a £5 increase doesn't mean being able to grow the service like it did in previous years, it simply means being able to afford the same number of staff that we have budgeted for currently. Alongside revenue budgets, we have been carefully planning and saving over a number of years for major capital investment. These investments are about improving the day-to-day experience, safety, and effectiveness of our workforce, and supporting our commitment to be an excellent, modern, and agile fire and rescue service. Planned investment includes a brand new training venue at Westcott, up to 8 million for the refurbishment or rebuilding, depending on members' wishes, of High Wycombe Station, and ongoing annual investments in operational equipment, ICT, and vehicles. I'll now invite Asif Omar to talk members through the detail of the paper.
Thank you, Councillor Hussain. I'm going to now focus on some of the key assumptions that underpin our revenue and capital budgets before handing over to Mark, who will update members on the position regarding reserves and also an update that Mark sent across to all members on Monday in terms of the budget movements. The MTFP report, together with revised Appendix A, sets out the proposed revenue and capital plans for period 2026 to 2031. As members will be aware, the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government has confirmed a multi-year settlement covering 2026-27 to 2028-29. I would now like to draw your attention to a number of key points. This year, we adopted the zero-based budgeting approach again, reviewing every supplies and services line from ground up. This work has enabled us to clearly identify where resources are required and to realign budgets accordingly. For example, due to the consistently high Treasury returns throughout 25-26, we have increased our interest budget for next year by over 200k compared to the year before. In terms of council tax precept, fire services have been given the flexibility to increase council tax by up to £5 for a Band D property. The core spending powers published by MHCOG assume that all services will increase council tax by this amount. This is reflected in our recommendation 1. If approved, the Band D precept would increase to £89.46 for 26-27, which equates to roughly an additional 10 pence per week compared to last year. Moving on to the fair funding assessment. So the former settlement funding assessment has been rebranded as the fair funding assessment. This now consolidates most grant funding, including revenue support grant and business rates income. The only grants excluded from the new FFA are the fire-specific pension grant and the New Dimensions grant. All other grants, including last year's National Insurance grant, have been absorbed into the FFA. This consolidation into a single reduced funding envelope has had a notable impact on the overall funding position. Moving on to Thames Valley Fire Control, included within our budget, we also include our revenue contribution to the Thames Valley Fire Control. We've increased our annual revenue contribution towards the Thames Valley Fire Control by 38k, resulting in an overall contribution of just over 1 million. In addition to this, the annual contributions to the Thames Valley Fire Control Renewals Fund has also been increased from 50k per annum to 90k to support the replacement of the command and control system as approved by the Joint Committee in December. In terms of key planning assumptions, our MTFP is based on the following financial assumptions. A £5 precept increase each year, not just this year, every year throughout the medium-term financial plan. In terms of council tax growth, tax base growth. Even though we are assuming a 1.6% increase in houses, we actually only saw an increase of 1.28% this year. In terms of pay awards, we're assuming a 4% pay increase in 26-27, followed by 3% per year thereafter. Turning to the capital program now, we have set a 5-year plan incorporating several major investments, including a new training facility at Westcott, up to 8 million for the refurbishment or rebuild of High Wycombe Fire Station, ongoing investment in operational fleet equipment and ICT refresh. This results in a total capital budget of 8.4 million for 26-27. Finally, I would like to note that the capital programme is supported by the reversal of the voluntary revenue provision, which is set out in the Prudential Indicators paper. I will now hand over to Mark, who will update members on the adequacy of reserves and an update he provided on Monday before we take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Azif. So at the Executive Committee last week, some additional detail was requested on the proposed budget and also the production of an additional scenario. These have been provided as Appendix 5 to this report, which was emailed to members on Monday, and you should also have a copy in front of you printed out. So page 1 of this appendix shows the movements from the approved 25-26 budget to the proposed 26-27 budget by directorate and category. As you can see on this page, the biggest increase in budget by far is the impact of pay increases, followed by other inflationary pressures. The relatively large increase in the People Directorate, which was questioned last week, is shown in the column titled Reporting Structure Changes. This is due to the change in the reporting line for operational training. The net impact on the whole service budget is 0. A breakdown of the other column can be seen on page 2, and the establishment profile column on this page and also on page 2 reflects increases as staff progress through pay scales. In some years, there may be decreases depending on staff turnover and also the cessation of temporary posts. Page 2 of that appendix shows the key movements within the net budget for 26-27 and all future years. I don't plan to go through that page in detail, other than to note there are little or no discretionary increases in there, but it does aim to capture future known pressures on our budget. Page 3 exemplifies the requested scenario of an additional 30 whole-time firefighters and the additional on-call staff that would be required to fully resource all 18 on-call appliances. In total, this would cost an additional £4 million per year. The executive summary to the paper notes that the final settlement is expected in February 2026, and indeed this was published just this past Monday. There are no changes in the final settlement that directly impact Buckinghamshire. It is interesting to note, though, however, that Northamptonshire Fire have now been allowed to increase their Band D precept by up to £10 without the need for a referendum. We will endeavour to investigate the rationale for this, as it may help our case for future precept flexibility in future years. As you'll see on page 33 of your packs, as the Chief Finance Officer, I'm required to report on, amongst other things, the adequacy of the proposed financial reserves. As has already been stated, the Fair Funding Review has had a significant impact on our financial position. Given this position, my professional advice must therefore be for the authority to increase council tax by the maximum amount allowable without triggering a referendum, namely an increase of £5 on a Band D property. I just want to take an opportunity to remind members of the context for our approach to setting the budget for the coming year. When we set the budget last year, we were aware the Fair Funding Review was coming and it was likely to have an impact that was going to be adverse to our funding, although at the time the quantity wasn't known. This is why a significant amount of budget was put into our revenue contribution to capital, as it was reasonably foreseeable this would need to be reversed out in future years to offset that funding decrease, and as you'll see from the papers, this has been the case. With the detailed settlement not being published until the 17th of December, this was always going to be a budget with a minimal number of necessary changes. Although the reserves position on page 25 of your packs shows a significant decrease in reserves over the medium term, I would like to reassure members this is not because we're using reserve to balance our revenue budget, but because of our ambitious capital investment plans we have to ensure our staff have the best facilities and equipment available to them. Azif and I would be happy to answer any questions members may have.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Asif, and thank you, Nick. Now, do you have any questions? Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Chairman. Just in relation to the actual number of whole-time firefighters, last year we averaged around the 310 mark. Are we budgeting to maintain that figure for the ensuing year?
The budget is still 300 as it has been for this year. We do plan to be, sometimes we'll be over that, sometimes we'll be slightly under that, just because of the tranches in which we have to take on whole-time staff. You can't just replace one at a time, for example, but that's built into our workforce plan in which we update members on as part of budget monitoring.
Any further questions? Councillor Wilson, yeah.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to the officers for the introduction. I think the fair funding settlement is very disappointing for this fire service, for a fire service that has been intending to invest in facilities and staff and do all the other things that we would want to see. And so from my point of view, I don't think we have any choice but to go with the recommendation on this. I do have a couple of questions, if I may.
Carry on.
As you mentioned, the council tax base assumptions and the fact that we are planning 1.6% in the forward years, but having achieved a lower level subsequently. If I read, I think it's page 34 of our pack correctly, I think that equates to about £150,000 a year of risk. And I just wanted to check my understanding. If we don't achieve the council tax base of 1.6%, then that's roughly a hit of about £150,000 per annum. So I was looking for some reassurance on the risk mitigation, if you like, the manageability of that, because clearly that is an assumption in that. And on the also on the same page, I wanted to check whether this budget included the council tax surplus that I know was declared from Buckinghamshire Council, and also the benefit of the council tax reduction scheme that Buckinghamshire Council was approved at Cabinet yesterday and is planning to take forward, because both of those have a benefit to the fire service. So I wanted to check if those were included or whether those were potential upsides to the plan. And then finally on page 36, which is the capital programme, I just wanted to ask whether or not the programme includes contingency and what we've got in for contingency. And also, and again, perhaps linked to the council tax base question, whether or not we planned at all for any Section 106 contributions from development in this horizon, or whether or not that would also be over and above the capital programme. Sorry, a series of questions there, Chairman, but I thought I'd get them all out if I was the last one.
I'm happy to take the first two, Mark, and then if you want to come in the capital one. In terms of the council tax base, I think you might be looking at the surplus figures, Councillor Wilson. So just to reassure you, the figures on Appendix 1, which is the council tax receipt surplus, there's a figure of 307 in 26-27. That does take into account the surplus that Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes have identified ourselves. The other point you made about the council tax base, I was kind of wondering where you got the 150k from, because I was trying to work out myself. You are right in terms of if we're assuming 1.6%, but we're only achieving 1.28%, there is potentially going to be a shortfall, but it wouldn't be as significant as what you've referred to. However, we're quietly confident that we're still trying to play catch up since the pandemic, and we've actually saw the council tax base reduced significantly since the COVID pandemic years, but we are starting to see a kind of upward trend now, and we're hopeful that we will get closer to that 1.6%. A few years ago, our assumptions were closer to 2%, so we have reduced those assumptions down, but every year, as and when we get the data, we will go back and look at it and reflect it accordingly. And then, yeah, I think that was it, the surplus and the base, and then capital, Mark.
Yeah, there's a bit in there around the council tax reduction scheme. as well. I'm not sure because we take the figures that are provided by the council, so we can ask that question of Bucks Council as to whether that's already reflected in there or whether they're waiting on the impact of the consultation. Initially, we believe there's an upside risk to it, so I think they're excluded, but we can go back and double check that for you. And in terms of just to kind of add a bit of gloss on what Asif was saying around the surplus deficit on council tax, we've assumed every year going forwards after this year about £150,000. Quite often it's higher than that, so we may see growth is slightly lower, but then it kind of catches up on itself the following year in terms of we normally get a slightly better surplus on council tax collection than we're perhaps anticipating. So that's kind of our risk mitigation, is to be slightly more prudent on the surplus to offset the potential risk of lack of growth. In terms of the capital programme, so there is contingency in there with each of the major schemes. So rather than have a contingency for the overall programme, be on a case-by-case basis, and the level will vary. So it'll be higher for major projects like Westcott, and I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but there is a fairly significant contingency in there for that. And when we come back with proposals around High Wycombe in due course, we will of course build a contingency into that as well. And the capital programme, it doesn't include any section 106 at present, so that'll be on top of that. I did have a meeting just yesterday with Bucks Council about their kind of infrastructure plan, so we are feeding into and we are having discussions around what that may look like for the service going forwards. But that's going to be kind of a longer term thing, probably beyond the scope of the medium term financial plan. But yeah, be reassured, we are exploring opportunities for funding that we can get in.
I think the assurance that probably I needed to get was around the council tax base, and you've said you've already planned that into the surplus equation, and there may be a little bit more coming from Bucks from their council tax reduction scheme, which still has to go through council, but went through cabinet yesterday. So you can probably pick up the numbers off the papers if you wanted to look at them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Any further questions? Councillor Stutchbury.
Brief question. With the capital programme, beg your pardon, going forward, in future years, if Westcott plan application is successful and that goes forward, are we entitled to, or will we be able to show generated income from that, which then will help offset, because we planned, that was the theory of that we may be able to generate income. We can't show that now, but in future years, presuming the application goes through and the badgers happily moved and found somewhere else to live, we can show income, because I think that will make quite a difference going forward. And also, can we show in our own costs of delivering training, that should show reduction in those costs, which will then produce a benefit financially somewhere else, being as we'll be doing more in-house and then exploring that. Those two questions I hope you can answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. Martin.
Yeah, if I just take the first point last. So in terms of Westcott, when we presented the business case, initially the costs actually increased slightly providing in-house. So we do accept that it's going to cost more, but it will be a much better service that's on our doorstep, exactly delivered how we want it, and we can access it when we want it. Because at the moment, we really struggle to get the slots with the college when we need them, and that doesn't help with our workforce planning at all. So slightly higher costs initially, but we've taken a prudent approach in terms of income. So you're correct, at the moment, we're not showing any income in there, but the aspiration is once we've kind of got it up and running and it's working smoothly, it's then start to offer it out to other services to generate some of that income to hopefully more than offset those increased costs. We've already had significant interest from other services who know we've got it kind of in our plans and are keen to use it as a site. So yeah, there's an upside risk in terms of the income with Westcott.
In the capital programme, we show the Red Fleet purchases, and we show no change in 2026, 2027, yet we show a increase or expenditure in 2027, 2028. At what point would we be in a position to plan that strategic planning for the exact right equipment that we need going forward, which is changing because buildings are getting higher in Milton Keynes, and large rural areas and with climate change have affected by unwarranted fires. And we also have, living in Buckingham, ever present in my mind, we also have quite a few flooding incidences. So it doesn't show that in there, but are those sort of considerations going to be considered in that? So we really don't know. We know what the needs might be, and we've got some indications where it's going. But what we haven't really done is an in-depth analysis of to make sure we purchase the right equipment for the next period. I presume that is going to be done in 2027 because you've put a notional amount of money in there to be agreed in 2027.
Yeah, so in terms of our fleet replacement programme, so you've got the operational red fleet line, which you pointed out. The reason there's kind of zero in there for the coming year is by the time we've actually ordered it, we won't come to pay to it to the following year because of the lead time on vehicles. That line is for kind of our regular replacement of our frontline pumping appliances as part of our combined Thames Valley contract. Every time we re-award that contract, we do look at the latest technology, what the future risks, what do these need to deal with, so can reassure members that happens all the time. Picking up a bit around kind of the increased height of buildings, the operational red fleet vehicles specials line, which you've got 2 lots of £1 million in the last 2 years, that is to look to replace our existing turntable ladder sets, one in the north, one in the south, and we will again look at kind of the latest technology, the best ways of doing that. So yeah, all of that is happening in the background.
Thank you, Mark. Any further questions? No, then let's move on to the recommendation. And remind you that this is a recorded vote. It is recommended that the report and statement of the Chief Finance Officer be noted. That's at Annex A council tax precept of £89.46 for a Band D equivalent property, equal to an increase of approximately 10 pence per week, and the revenue budget as set out in Appendix 1 be approved, and C, the capital programme as set out in Appendix 2 be approved. I'll leave it to Graham Bretton to take us through the vote.
Thank you, Chair. I'll undertake a roll call by surname alphabetical order. When your name is called, please indicate whether you vote for, against, or abstain. Ado. Thank you. Bailey.
Paul.
Thank you. Banks. Yeah. Thank you. Carol. Thank you. Exxon. Thank you. Gone. Thank you. Paul. Thank you. Hussein OBE. Thank you. Hussein. Thank you. Lancaster. Thank you. McLean. Thank you. Longer.
4.
Thank you. Priestley.
4.
Thank you. Sherwell. Thank you. Stutchbury. 4. Thank you. Wilson.
4.
Thank you. That's carried unanimously, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks. Sorry, item 8B, which you'll find on page 41 of the agenda. This will be introduced by Marcus Hussey. This is the report on the Prudential Code. I don't know whether, I think perhaps Councillor Hussein might wish to make an introductory remark, and then over to you after that, Marcus.
Thank you, Chairman. This paper is presented annually in support of the medium-term financial plan. It shows the borrowing and capital investment is affordable, prudent, and sustainable. To support the medium-term financial plan, the authority plans to reverse part of the voluntary revenue provision, as was explained earlier, that was made in 2015-16 to help finance the plans for capital investment. Although this will increase the capital financing requirement, it will not require the authority to take out any new loans. This paper is by nature a very technical paper, and I will ask Marcus to take us through any key points he wishes to raise.
Thank you. Good morning, members and officers. Today I will present a new with the Prudential Code, Prudential Indicators and minimum revenue provision statement for 26-27. This is a technical paper and is presented annually to this committee to approve the recommendations. Prudential Code was established to ensure capital investments plans are affordable, prudent and sustainable, and that the Treasury management decisions are taken in accordance with good professional practice. The potential indicators presented here demonstrate that the current plans for capital investments meet this criteria and present an acceptable level of risk for the authority. The minimum revenue provision is a statutory charge to the general fund, the revenue budget, which ensures the authority has sufficient cash balances to repay borrowing on maturity, reducing the refinancing risk. The authorised limit for borrowing and other long-term liabilities has been set at 2.5 million above the operational boundary limit to allow for effective cash management and account for lease liabilities following the implementation of IFRS 16 lease accounting. This paper supports the medium-term financial plan, which ASIF has presented today, and according to the MTFP, there are no plans for additional borrowing. As mentioned, in 27-28, the authority is forecasting to reverse the voluntary revenue provision of approximately 3.5 million to support the capital programme. This has been factored into prudential indicators shown in the appendix. Thank you, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Marcus. Any questions on the prudential indicators? Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chairman. Given this is my first year on the Fire Authority, I just wanted to check my understanding. As was said, this is a paper that's introduced every year. I was struck by, in paragraph 1.1, that it refers back to a decision taken in 2015-16, which is now 10 years ago. And obviously, clearly the legacy still stands, but I was just struck by the fact that was a 10-year decision and we're still referring back to it. And obviously the world has changed quite a lot in that period of time. And then if I look at the final page, so the summary on the final page, and the two methods for calculating prudent position. So this is page 7 of the pack, 52 of the packet. It said the methods were approved by members in 2008, 2009, which goes even further back. Members, the Secretary of State says there's a number of different methods you can choose, and two of which were agreed by members in 2008, 2009. And under the first method, the CFR, the Capital Financing Requirement method, it says this method is no longer applicable. So one of the two we chose in 2008, 2009 is no longer applicable. And under the asset life method, obviously that's the last one. So I don't have a problem with the paper and the limits that are being proposed. It does rather feel that perhaps it may be appropriate through the coming year to revisit whether or not we're still working this to a series of decisions that were taken an awful long time ago. Maybe that's an action looking forward, but I'd be happy to take input from the officers on that.
You make a very interesting point, as ever, with your forensic examination of the papers, Councillor Wilson. But I think that Mark Hemming would like to comment.
Yeah, just to add a bit of kind of background to that, the reason for referring to the 15-16 decision is we've mentioned it every year because we didn't want members to lose sight of it. So we said at the time we're doing this for a very good reason, but at some point in future we may need to reverse at least part of that decision, which is what we've referred to when we're reversing out the voluntary revenue provision. So it's just to provide members that reassurance that it wasn't something we'd forgotten about. It was always part of our plans every single year that we may need to revisit that, and that's what we're doing. So that's that part. Yeah, and the 2008-9, that's just a kind of a legacy history. They changed the way it was calculated. That's why you've got two methods, the old method and the new method. We will, if and when we reverse part of that voluntary revenue provision, we'll need to use the asset life method, and we'll come back to members with details about how we've applied that and the detail around that. So yeah, we'll pick that up in future papers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Any further questions on that paper? Okay, there being no questions. Oh, sorry, Councillor.
I didn't, points raised by Councillor Wilton picking up the historicals. Not that we can agree it, but are we agreed that at some point, the suggestion was to review them? Do we agree that we will actually do that to make sure that we schedule it in the early term to build it into the long term for next year? Because those decisions in 2015 was a very different period there. We could go into what went on in 2015. I think we did that in the executive meeting. But I think we do need to actually slot some time to look at it, and they do have ongoing implications in the way we operate. So through the chair, where would we be taking that, at what stage, to make sure that we actually take note of those points and actually move them forward?
Thank you, Councillor Secretary. I mean, you're aware that we have a financial report at every meeting of the executive and the full authority, and our officers keep us fully up to date. But if Mark would like to add a comment to that, that's fine.
It's a statutory item that has to come back for approval every single year. And so if anything changes in the meantime, we'll of course flag that. But otherwise it'll be every single year we'll look at them.
Thank you, Mark. The recommendation from the executive committee is that the authority be recommended to approve the prudential indicators for 2026-27 and the minimum revenue provision policy statement. All those in favour? Any opposed? Any abstentions? There being no, that's item 8C on page 53 of the agenda, members' scheme of allowances. Have a report before us, which the Director of Legal and Governance would comment on.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. This is a recommendation from the Executive Committee. The report starts at page 53 of your agenda packs. In approving the annual scheme of allowances, the authority must have regard to the recommendations of the independent remuneration panels of its constituent councils, and for your ease of reference, headlines from these recommendations are set out as footnotes at page 54, and for completeness, links to the full reports are included as links in the report. The draft scheme itself is at pages 57 to 69 of your agenda pack and reflects, if approved, maintaining the indexation that's been in place agreed by the authority in 2022. Chair, that concludes my comments.
Thank you. Do I have any questions on this paper? No, then the recommendation from the executive committee is that, and I think, is this a recorded vote?
No.
No, okay. That the authority be recommended to adopt the scheme of members' allowances for 26-27s as shown in the draft as Appendix 1. All in favour? Say aye.
Carried.
I think we ought to have some automated system whereby the microphones come on automatically. It's called Graham.
Yeah.
So, item 8D, performance management, to be introduced by Craig Newman.
Morning, everyone. Today I'm presenting our Fire and Rescue Services Q3 Performance Management Pack. As with previous Fire Authority meetings, this report is aligned to the Services Community Risk Management Plan, which came into effect in April 2025. As is now customary, the report begins with 3 highlighted performance measures, the first being the home fire safety visits completed. This continues to be a strong area of performance, both in terms of volume and the quality that we deliver. The second is our fire safety audits. This measure rightly receives significant scrutiny at most fire authorities. As noted within the report, we were pleased to see very positive figures this quarter. As with the home fire safety visits, we remain focused on engaging with those most at risk. The third was our over-the-border mobilisations into Bucks Fire and Rescue's grounds. Like the safety audits, this area routinely attracts considerable attention. As many of you will know, since the move to a joint control room in 2015, the service adopted a quickest is quickest approach to mobilisations across the Thames Valley. Due to the geographical landscape and the positioning of neighbouring services, moving to a quickest is quickest method resulted in BFRS receiving more assistance than we provide. Again, it's important to note that most of these mobilisations into BFRS grounds are driven by a combination of the landscape and the quickest resource model. With this in mind, though, we have included slightly more detail than usual to illustrate how we utilise these appliances when we call upon them. Moving past the highlighted measures, much of the pack accompanying commentary consistent with previous months, with one key exception: attendance times. Following feedback on Q2 report, we have now included enhanced detail, including charts showing minute-by-minute breakdown of all incidents attended during the period, supported by narrative explaining some of the slower responses. Some of you may have noticed one of the incidents showing an attendance time of 51 minutes, which is not described in the commentary. Rather than adding an overly long narrative section, I'll briefly explain it here. The incident originated from Thames Valley Police, who reported a credible threat of arson. After crews were mobilised, they were instructed not to proceed directly to the incident, but instead to hold at a nearby standby point. Unfortunately, the crew did not book in attendance at the standby location and instead recorded attendance only when they were then later cleared to go to the original address. This example, along with others referenced in the report, demonstrates a recurring theme: the importance of crews booking in attendance at the appropriate time. Our service delivery team is actively working with firefighters to address this. As you can imagine, these booking in practices can significantly influence our reported attendance times. With that overview complete, my colleagues and I are happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Craig. Any questions to the performance monitoring report? I've got Councillor Banks and then Councillor Wilson, Councillor Addo. Start with Councillor Banks.
Okay, thank you, Chair. It's just a clarification because I wasn't entirely sure. If you look at page 89 or 13 of the of this particular subject, you'll see that breakdown of attendance times at 2 incidents between the 1st of October and the 31st of December 2025. You actually have 30 instances of 0 attendance times. Does that mean that by some miracle that the fires were started within fire stations?
Yeah, I can take that. So there are different reasons for that. One of the main ones is we actually have people walking to our fire stations. So quite often, if you've got a ring that's too small or has been damaged in some way and crushed, they will come to the station and that will get removed at the station. We also have where we might drive past an incident, but we've not been called to it from the control. The appliance will then call into control and book themselves into that. So it would be a 0-second response on that. So that's where those zeros generally come from. We get a lot of walk-ins with rings, believe it or not.
But thanks for the clarification. Well, thank you for the clarification.
Interesting one. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chairman. I wanted to come back to one of the highlighted ones, which is the fire safety audits, and to make a similar point to the one I made the previous review. By my calculations, I think we would have to hit a target of 89 for the remaining 3 months. And obviously we're well advanced halfway through each of those, halfway through that period. And whether or not we need to be either adjusting our expectations when we come to look at this for next year, or raising our resources and capacity to meet the numbers. So I just wanted some understanding in terms of what the forward look. Whenever I look at performance measures, I always want to look forward. But you know, the curve is getting further away from us. And how do we address that? Either we have to have a more realistic expectation, or we have to put more resources into trying to deliver that, because I think it is a very important feature from our community's point of view, from a preventative point of view. So I'd like some clarification. I've got a couple of other questions as well, please.
Okay, well, let's deal with that first. I think Doug Buchanan would like to come in on that one.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And Councillor Priestley raised some very similar and sensible questions in the exec committee. So I did just a little bit of preparation as it happens. And if you'll indulge me, I will do a bit of a backward look before talking about future. So the audit target we have in place is an ambitious one. The reality is month on month, we probably need a bit of a fair wind to meet that target. So if we lose people out of the system for training, qualification, etc., or we have particularly high demand in other protection areas, then it is a challenging target to meet. However, it is designed to allow us to manage our planned activity, i.e. risk-based inspection programme, and also leave a little bit of headroom for our demand activity, which is essentially post-fire incidents and complaints. So that's roughly where the number comes from, if you like. From a sort of assurance piece and for context, in 2025 and 2024, we completed 700 audits. 2024, I think, was just shy of 700. 2025 was 700. That's 132% increase on 2023 when the inspection were in and when they were quite rightly challenging the service around our productivity. So we have really pivoted how the protection function operates, and we are ambitious in that target. Looking forward, and to your point, we are currently reviewing the 26-27 targets across all measures, and the audits will be one of them. In reality, I think the number we will alight on will be very similar to the one we're on currently, because when we draw the lines essentially on the risk-based inspection programme of what is appropriate against our methodology for very high and high, I think it will come out with roughly the same figures. So there is a question for us internally around around capacity and protection. Right now, are we 100% resilient around our protection function? Probably not, because you lose one or two qualified officers and it's very, very difficult to replace. So we have done a lot of work around that in the previous couple of years. We've tried to make good use of grant funding from Home Office and more recently MHCLG. Again, when I talk to Asif and Mark about that, it's really tricky, because when it's grant funding, it's difficult to increase your establishment on the risk that funding potentially gets taken away. However, you may have seen on the annual plan for next year, looking at our protection function, resilience, how we might make better use of some of our station staff, all builds into the picture of that forward look and how we kind of do meet that target going forward.
Doug, I think Councillor Wilson has two further questions to raise, and then
I apologise for asking a question you got asked last week, but at least you get to rehearse the answer for it. So, and I also appreciate, picking up Councillor Banks's comment, appreciated the breakdown on attendance times to incidents. Clearly, we put in for first appliance. Would it be possible to see something similar for second appliance? Because I understand that some of our procedures and call outs clearly require 2 or more appliances depending on what they are. So I think that will be quite useful looking forward, and maybe for a consideration. And then on the training, I was interested in terms of the recruitment campaign for on-call firefighters. This is on page 99 of the pack. And in particular, the SHL testing, which I had to look up and see, and then I tried it, and I don't think I'd have got through either. But the question, with such a high level of failure on SHL testing, is our campaign for recruitment actually reaching the right people? Or do we need to change our targeting? Because we don't want to be pulling in people who are going to have such a high failure rate at the second stage of application. So can we improve the targeting of the campaign? Either do we need to change the testing regime, because we may be losing some good people, but they don't have those particular aptitudes? Or can we change the targeting so that we're not spending a lot of time evaluating people who we consider not to be suitable? And then my final question, whilst I get them all out, Chairman, on the absences, there's a lot of comment around flu. My wife is a GP practice nurse. The NHS actually delayed the application of the flu vaccine this year. And I think that had an impact on whether or not we might look to, if we get hold of earlier vaccine, then that may help alleviate some of the early stage problems. So it's just a learning for future years.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Can I just ask Craig, first of all, on the second appliance, is the data available for us to accommodate that?
It is available. I'll give a little context as well. At the end of each year, we actually write a report purely on our response standards, which ironically excludes the zeros we mentioned earlier, because we don't feel it's fair to include those. But we also look at second appliance attendance time. So it might be worth bringing that through the governance process as a whole year thing rather than just each quarter. I think might be more prudent. But if the council is happy with that.
Okay, I think that's a valid point to note. Anything to add to that, Doug?
No, not particularly. I mean, obviously our response standard as set out in the CRMP is about the first appliance, as you know. But you're quite right that obviously a number of our incidents do require large predetermined attendances. So we can probably have a look. Craig's right in terms of that annual overview, but if we can, we'll take something outside of the room about being able to at least give you some indication and confidence around what that second pump looks like as well on a more frequent basis, if that's what you'd like to see.
Thank you.
I think on that one, Chairman, I think let's have a look at it and then we'll decide whether or not what we want to do going forwards.
Moving on to the second point on recruitment, you have echoed exactly the points that I've already discussed. 70% failed to pass the SHL psychometric test, and I made the same point that either we're using the wrong version of the test or we are promoting the recruitment to the wrong people. But Ronnie will give us a defined answer to that now.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the question. Completely noted the points you make there. So we are looking at the targeting. We're targeting the right recruitment campaigns. We're targeting the right people, but also the SHL test, looking at what are the barriers. Are we giving enough support to people when they do apply? So that's a full review there of the recruitment of on-call in terms of those potential barriers in the way. That work has already taken place, so hopefully we will move on that quite quickly. We could take the second point as well regarding sickness absence, and I think there is a large piece of work that's already taken place over the last couple of months, because you can see from the reports that over the October, November, December period, there was a steady increase or plateau of sickness absence. What we did over that period was a lot more early intervention. I think it goes back to your point, Councillor Wilson, in regards to identifying patterns earlier. So with the vaccination next year, do we look at that earlier in the year? But secondly, making sure we're more proactive with management discussions, having one-to-one with staff, making sure we identify patterns in terms of sickness absence. And that work has already seen an improvement for January. It's not stated in these figures because that's up to December, but in January we've seen a large improvement in terms of, that's the right terminology, in terms of the sickness absence number, but it is something we continue to monitor.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Addo and Councillor Nicknam Hussain, and then I'll come back to Councillor. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. My question or clarification is what I seek. Is due to the geographical landscape we operate in and the support from neighboring teams, how do we effectively record our performance to reflect that support that we receive in our data? And how does it influence our plans?
So I guess best way to explain that is it's understanding which ones we would expect to call upon due to landscape and geography compared to those that we wouldn't. Those that we wouldn't are normally due to simultaneous demand. So if there was two big incidents going on at once, we wouldn't normally expect to call upon those additional over the board appliances. To reassure you, every couple of years we do run a hefty what we call over the border report, which analyses everything that comes in, everything that goes out. We have maps from every different service that where they came in, where they come to even to we break down the county by every 100 metres squared. I think it's 100 metres squared or kilometres squared. And we work out the value of each square of how much it's cost us to bring over the border in. We know exactly in that report also. We allude to where geographically we would expect them to come into, where they would be the first and where they wouldn't. So the ones that we've called upon, where we wouldn't expect to call them, that we look at as well. We also look at the number we've called per instance. So if the first 3, for example, were called from over the border, why was that? And was that what we would expect to see? So it's more about what happened in reality versus what we'd expect to. We expect that 10% of our incidents will be mobilised from over the border. Is that what we're actually seeing? And we do that on a regular basis. And again, we can share that report once it's been through the governance process, if that would help.
Thank you. Yeah, carry on.
So, so obviously with that data, the planned, the expected, and what actually happens will therefore influence the next year or future planned delivery.
Yes, although it's hard to. So what we've also looked at mitigation. So how could we reduce it? Nothing. We looked at standby locations and what ghost pumps and lots of different scenarios that have been mentioned in the fire authorities and throughout crews. None of them were cost effective, anywhere near being cost effective. So we can provide all that information. So that's where we would put locations in where we would use over the border the most. Even if we put a 3rd or 4th pump down in those locations, it wouldn't mitigate the majority and therefore would be a bigger cost to us than the saving by a considerable amount. And again, that's all been factored into those reports.
Thank you. Anything to add? No? No, fine. Councillor Hussain next, and then Councillor Banks, then Councillor Hall, then Councillor Stutchbury, just to manage your expectations. So, Councillor Hussain, Nicknam Hussain.
As it's quite a positive report as always, so we're quite pleased about that. Mostly greens and ambers. The only two that stick out is the bank shifts, which is red, and the on-call. The on-call, I think we're aware of and we're trying to work on. But can you give us some indication on what's happening with bank shifts?
Yeah, Doug. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. So as has been discussed in this meeting probably a few times over the last year or so, we do have a relatively lean operating model. So the CRMP requires us, or we set an expectation on ourselves for 12 whole-time appliances. We know and we budget for bank to support that. So some of that unavailability whole time relates to things like appliances off the run because of contaminants management or crew welfare or whatever. But ultimately there is an element of on a given shift not having sufficient numbers or not having sufficient skills. So we utilise bank to support that. As it stands, against our establishment number, it feels like it's about the right balance of a substantive establishment and the use of bank or overtime. The quarter in itself, we would expect to see certainly a spike in December. So we know December is a peak leave period for staff, and therefore we would expect that to have an impact. And we also know that we have really high sickness across all of the 3 months. So again, we understand that being an impact. So that's probably all understood. We look at it on a monthly basis in our internal governance, and we'll continue to track it.
Thank you, Banks.
Thank you, Chair. The Buckinghamshire Milton Keynes Fire Service is obviously a public-facing service, and it does this via home and business visits, tenants events and open days and so on. But I noticed on 121, you've done an analysis of digital and data engagement, website active users and social media engagement. With regard to the first point, the active website users, I'm not entirely sure I agree. G indicates 10,000, I suppose, visits or active per month, but actually the active users are in thousands anyway. So that means 10 million a month. That's a huge number. Can you just confirm that these are accurate? And also, when you say whether these are adequate, or when you look at itemizing these, are you making a comparison against other fire and rescue services in terms of how you're presenting yourself? I have another question after that.
Yeah, so the number should be tens of thousands, or thousands, sorry, so it should be 10,000. It's not compared to any other fire and rescue service due to different populations and budgetary and everything else. The targets were set by our marketing and communication team as to where they believed they should be, with a note of it with social media wanting to increase to improve our reach. So when it comes to social media, it's about engagement, whereas websites, it's about visits. So with regards to the target, the 10, I can't give you a defined answer, but I can come back to you once I've spoken to the communications team. But with social media, it's definitely much engagement, and the provision of improving that number considerably, which it has done over the last 2-3 years by dramatic numbers.
Thank you, and for correcting the inaccuracy of the website visits, which horrifies me. If you're getting several hundred times more than an average website, it's absolutely amazing. What are you doing right? My second question really is, are you using this as an opportunity to see where people are visiting? And those that you expect to have a high profile are not having a high profile. And what are you doing about that?
So I do know they look at the analysis of what pages have hit most, and we report that locally on a monthly basis on social media, website and internet. We look at all the pages and how long they spend and all that sort. Again, without someone from marketing comms here, I wouldn't want to steal their thunder, but I can come back to you with a more fuller answer. But yes, they do analyse where the pages are hit and for how long they stay.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Councillor Banks. Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Chairman. Just on page 95, the over the border mobilisations. Looking at the southeast of the county, and I don't think we've got any representatives actually in the room, but adding Beaconsfield and Gerrards Cross together on that table is 244 times we've had over the border coming into that area. That to me seems very high. And if I were a resident, having looked at the previous agenda item where, you know, we're putting the council tax up, the residents would be entitled to say, well, I'm paying Buckinghamshire Fire and Rescue and I'm actually getting Berkshire turning up. And, you know, what point do those numbers stack up to say, well, do we need another fire station down there, or do we need more resource down there? That's one point. And the other point is, with those numbers, how is our inspector going to view those numbers on the next inspection? Will that go negatively against us?
Thank you, Councillor Hall. I'm tempted to come in myself, but I think I'll hand it over to Doug Buchanan.
Thank you. So I think the geography of that part of the county is such that it's always going to be quite a tricky one, because of where Slough and Langley are as full-time fire stations versus our full-time. The only way we would reasonably be able to, well, there's two ways we could reasonably stop them coming into our patch. One is we would have to relocate one of our fire stations onto the border, which probably doesn't stack up, or we could put in special arrangements with Thames Valley Fire Control to increase their turnout times onto our patch, but I think that would be really counterintuitive in terms of what the public get out of the borderless mobilising arrangement. So I think from a public perspective, they're getting the fastest appliance. I think from an HMI perspective, if they were to come in and look at our resourcing model and say, your resourcing model and your response standard are propped up by surrounding services, then we would be in trouble. But I don't believe that's the case. I think we've got a really strong response model. And I think where there are those anomalies like that southeast corner, there's evidence and justification of why it is as it is. So if we take the last quarter as an example, with the exception of that Royal Berkshire influence, if you like, into the southeast corner, there were only 38 occasions incidents out of the 1,535 where the first attending appliance was from over the border rather than one of our own. So I think we can present a really strong picture to HMI that, yes, we have a good resourcing model ourselves, and we apply mutual aid and support from surrounding services appropriately for the benefit of our community.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Councillor Hall, for those points. Councillor Stutchbury, and I think, yes, after Councillor.
Thank you, and thank you for that answer, Doug, to that question. On page 18 of 46, it needs to expressing that with 692 false alarms, what we are here is to turn out 2 alarms and 2 fires in the priority. But there's 2 very red ones in there, which is good intent false alarm. I don't know quite how that works out. How you have good intent that you have a false alarm. So that probably needs a bit of explanation what that means. And the fire alarms due to humans, 173. Now these impact on availability to be somewhere else through false alarm. So they do have a negative impact on other people. While somebody's gone to false alarm, they can't be available. So else it's quite serious. But 692, whether that's high or low, I take on advice, but it is resources going somewhere where they're not productive. But in saying that, there's no way that this fire authority wouldn't turn out to an alarm. Let's be clear about that. So between the 2, there has to be an understanding of where it is, or some communications through what was already said about a wonderful comms team about making sure that when you actually make a proper call. Thank you.
Doug's going to take this, I think, but if Mark wants to add.
I'll make a start and see if we want to add. So false alarms is a really tricky area for us, both locally and as a sector, because as you rightly say, there's, how do you draw the line about what's appropriate to attend and not attend? Obviously, there's a split between false alarms in commercial premises and false alarms in domestic dwellings. Councillors will be aware that obviously we've done some really good work around those commercial premises in terms of our new procedure, and we've seen the benefits of that in terms of quite a reduction. And I think it's appropriate because ultimately the law is such that the responsible person has responsibilities around their fire safety matters. From a kind of single domestic dwelling perspective and thinking about the risk to the community, it's quite a challenging area to drive those numbers down. We do look at it on a monthly basis in our performance meeting, and we try and identify trends. So, a significant proportion of them will be kitchen/cooking related, and we do look at opportunities for our prevention team if we can do some appropriate messaging or targeting, etc., etc. It's a really difficult one to say, okay, so how do we bring that number down? One of the things that the prevention team are doing, though, which is great, working with Craig's team, is looking at repeat offenders, if you like. So there are, for example, I think it was identified that there was one household that we've been to 15 times in a recent period. Well, that's a clear area where we can make an intervention and we can go and do some education or support or safeguarding, whatever's appropriate. So where we can, we will try and drive those numbers down. But the reality is they will always be a reasonable proportion of our incident numbers.
Thank you, Doug. Craig, do you want to add anything to that?
it was perfect, but the only clarification I would give was, so when it says good intent, that might be somebody walking past, hearing a smoke detector, or seeing a flame through a window and reporting it. But the household, they were burnt the cooking, they knew it was burnt, they were just waiting for the smoke detector to go off. So it's somebody like a passerby or somebody phoning in with the good intent that they thought it was a fire, but it wasn't. Human behaviour as well, it's more in relation to a smoke detector could go off, but due to the detector did what it was supposed to, it wasn't faulty, but due to the human either sitting underneath it smoking, doing building works without with dust going into it, it's things like that that we try and capture. So we try and understand what caused the alarms. That's why you get the breakdown of it. Therefore, we can then adjust our social media and our repeat offenders. We can adjust all of our prevention activity around that.
Thank you, Chairman. So a thought arising from Councillor Hall's comments, and I wonder whether we could just look, not now, but just look in a bit more detail about some of the out of area stuff. It seems to me, if your nearest fire station is Slough or Bicester, then having out of area service coming to deal with the fire there is absolutely the sensible thing, because they are much bigger places to have an establishment in than where we would put a service. Similar, and that applies in the other direction as well, presumably. There are places, I mean, the Tring Salient's a particularly peculiar piece of geography. There are other places where a Bucks fire engine going to somewhere that doesn't happen to be in Bucks is the most sensible way from a regional point of view of providing the service to that place. So that's one subset. The second subset is when somebody comes to us or we go to them because it requires more than one appliance, and the best way of getting a secondary appliance to them is out of area. And the third is perhaps when we're not able, or they're not able to deliver the time that they ought to be able to deliver. So because for one reason or another, we can't get there, although normally you would expect us to get there, somebody else comes in. And I don't want to make too much bureaucracy out of it, but having an intellectual understanding of the extent to which those numbers break down between those sort of categories, I think might be very helpful to us.
That's a good point. I'm sure officers will take that on board. Craig, do you want to respond at all? Or?
Only that we'll try to include that when we bring down that breakdown. Bring back.
Right. I'm just going to get a mic fitted here. The recommendation is that the performance management figures for quarters 3, 25, 26 be noted. Agreed. Item 9 on your agenda at page 123 is the Treasury Management Strategy, which will be introduced by Marcus Hussey, but I think Councillor Hussain would like to introduce that.
This paper sets out the Treasury Management Strategy for 2026-27. The current strategy is performing well, operating effectively, and this paper proposes no changes to the current strategy. Although interest rates are projected to fall, the current level of cash balances mean that the income budget for 26-27 has been set at 800,000, which is 200,000 higher than the original forecast for the coming year. Again, I will ask Marcus to take us through any key points he wishes to bring to members' attention.
Thank you. Today I'm presenting you with the Treasury strategy for 26-27. There are no significant changes as mentioned compared to the current strategy that we're operating in. We will continue to invest surplus funds in secure short-term deposits, mature on a frequent basis, while ensuring the authority can maintain adequate liquidity to meet short-term expenditure requirements. In terms of the strategy itself, there's sections that cover the Treasury Management Policy Statement, Treasury Strategy Statement, Annual Investment Strategy, Counterparty List, Prospects for Interest Rates and Credit Rate Definitions. I will talk through the borrowing and investment position before speaking about the rates projections for 26-27. At the start of 26-27, the overall borrowing position will be 4.5 million, with maturities between 1 and 27 years, with annual interest payments of approximately 214,000. The next loan is due to mature in December 2027, and funds already been set aside to pay this. There are no plans for additional borrowing during 2026-27 as per the medium-term financial plan that has been presented today. In terms of investment position, as at the 31st of December 2025, the authority had approximately 27.5 million invested in fixed-term deals with various UK banks, UK building societies, local authorities, and instant access accounts via money market funds and current account balances. Moving on to interest rates and future projections. Since August 2024, the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee has voted to reduce the interest base rate on 6 separate occasions, and as of today, it currently sits at 3.75%. The authority's Treasury advisors are projecting this will reduce by 0.5% to 3.25% by March 2027, and this can be seen in the prospects for interest rates section in the strategy. The authority has been able to benefit from the decent interest rates projections for 2025-26, and we're approximately going to achieve roughly 1.3 million against a budget of 600,000. Despite the fall in interest rates and as part of the medium-term financial plan, the authority will be increasing the investment income projections for 26-27 by 200,000 to 800,000 compared to the current year. This improvement is primarily driven from delays in capital programme expenditure and upfront receipts of additional pension grant funding, which is yet to be spent. As a result, the authority is holding a higher short-term cash balances, enabling the authority to generate increased investment income return despite the lower rates in the environment. Finally, as referenced within the strategy, officers will continue to monitor the Treasury performance, and this will be reported at the Overview and Audit Committee. Thank you, and happy to take any questions.
Do you have any questions on that report? Councillor Sherwell and then Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. We've been going through a very similar discussion on another committee in Buck these last 2 weeks, and that raised a number of questions. And this report, I have to say, raises rather less questions than the first report I saw in Bucks. But there are 2 things here. One is that sometimes you can actually get a very good return for a very short-term loan. And we're talking around 2 or 3 days sometimes. And obviously that decision has to be taken very quickly if we're going to do it. Secondly, some of the offers that are available, obviously, if you're lending to some institutions, you can just rock up and lend to them effectively. But there are others where there's a period for which an offer is available. And if you don't respond quickly, that offer has disappeared across the horizon. What I'm not clear on is, do we have a policy on use of very short-term loans? And if so, what is it? And secondly, if we decide that we've got money to spare that we can loan, either in that way or in any other way, I mean, for instance, council tax comes in not necessarily in the order that we want to spend it. What is the authorisation process? And Key, you and your team of professional guys, and I understand that, and I expect you to be able to do the professional stuff, and it's not up to me as a member to challenge that. But what I do want the feeling for is that there is the safeguarding process, that we're not relying on the judgment of a single individual.
So we monitor our cash flow on a daily basis, and we project what we're going to anticipate the ins and outs of the income and expenditure for the whole of the financial year. So on a daily basis, we could look at our bank balance and go, right, we've got X amount in there, we don't need it today. can we invest that short term to be able to benefit from the better interest rates? And that's what we do as a team. We also seek advice from our treasury advisors, so they on a weekly basis, they send us some rates that are happening in the market, and we can then tap onto those rates. If we've got the cash available, we can use that. What we tend to do as part of the cash flow, we look at, go, right, where is our pinch point in terms of when we need the money to come back in? It's usually around the month end when we're having to pay salaries and pay pensions. So we ensure we've got money coming in when needed. We also have creditors' backs when we do. So we pay our suppliers on a weekly basis. So again, we need to make sure we've got enough money in the bank to be able to cover those. So that's why we tend to use more of the instant access accounts that we've got available, money market funds, and we hold quite a high cash balance in those, which then generate better return on investments rather than have it sat in our normal current account balances. So we do look at that on a daily basis. Hope that answers your question. Yeah, so as part of the strategy, officers have got the authorization to be able to invest funds on a daily basis, and within my team it cuts down to me, and I do seek advice from Passive at Mark as well in terms of which counterparts we go to. We also have a list in the strategy of who we can invest with, and we tend to stick with those, and we go to UK banks or building societies, and more recently we've invested with local authorities as well because they offer a better rate of return on investment.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Councillor Sherwell. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chairman. I think we have a very, very good Treasury management. We do review this at Overview and Audit Committee, as was stated. I should probably point out that the terms of reference for the Overview and Audit Committee would be to consider and make recommendations to the authority on the annual Treasury management strategy, but our current meeting sequencing doesn't allow us to do that. Otherwise, we've had to have signed it off on the 5th of November. But I have discussed with Mr. Hemming and Mr. Britton, in accordance with both best practice and our external auditors, that we will be adding at least one more meeting in the programme for next year to enable us to do that. So that's why it hasn't been brought by the Overview and Audit Committee. So I had a couple of questions, and I've also been party to some of the painful discussions that Councillor Sherwell related to. On page 133, there's a comment, and I understand Councillor Hussain introduced it, there's no changes. There was a comment here that said it would be beneficial if the authority could lend to existing counterparties for a longer duration. This will increase the risk slightly, but potentially offer increased returns. And whether or not we have a plan to look at that as a proposal. Although we're not changing anything here, there is a suggestion that we may wish to look at something. So what is the plan for doing that? And back to the point, I think that Councillor Sherwell was referencing on page 136 in our counterparty list for UK-based counterparties. The 6th item is collateralised LA deposit. Is that local authorities? And this is a duration of yellow 60 months. One of the things we've been discussing in Buckinghamshire Council is how long, given this is a very fluid situation with local authorities, and whilst there is no financial risk because they're all underwritten by government, there is a reputational risk, and the extent to which situations are moving. I mean, even this week's announcements on local government funding and statutory overrides and send deficits and things, it is changing, and whether or not 60 months is where we might want to be. So that was a couple of questions I just had that it would be useful to get some input on.
I would take your that point on longer term investments. So we haven't got the cash flows to be able to invest longer than 365 days because that's what our funding element gets. We get obviously as part of ASIS MTFP, we know what the funding is going to be for that year, and then it obviously changes year on year. So we can only really invest a year in advance of that. In terms of the yellow in there, which is 60 months. So these are suggested durations by our Treasury advisors. If we had the funds available, we could invest up to that limit, but we tend to only invest up to 365 days to ensure we can manage our cash flow effectively.
And I think that's a sensible. The practicalities of our cash flow are also a sensible limit on our investment strategy.
I think Mark wants to add to that. Thanks.
Just to pick up your point on local authorities, what we do is we don't just go on kind of, oh, it's a local authority, it's fine. We do look at local authority concern. And we have in the past been kind of, as Mark says, we get offered rates. This is a really good rate. We've looked at that local authority and thought, no, actually, because of their particular circumstances, we're not going to lend to that authority. So it's not just a blanket approach. We do apply a level of professional judgment on top of that as well. On terms of your comment on page 133, that's just a question of tense. It should say it is beneficial because we have added 6 months to all of those colours. That's just a hangover from when it was changed, or probably about 5 or 6 years ago.
Do you have any further questions on the Treasury management paper? No, then the recommendation from the executive is that the authority approves the Treasury management policy statement, Treasury management strategy statement, and the annual investment strategy for 26-27. All those in favour? I say aye. That's approved. Thank you. This time, statutory paper on pay policy principles, and I'll hand over to Ronnie Davidson for that.
Thank you, Chair.
I should have invited Councillor Priestley to introduce the item. My apologies.
Thank you, Chair. Pay is one of the clearest signals any organisation sends about what and who it values. When we compare ourselves with our peer fire authorities, we are not chasing a headline. We are asking a serious question. Are we fair? Are we competitive? Are we consistent with our values? Because fairness in pay is not only about the top figures and the bottom figure. It is about what sits in the middle. Who gets access to progression? Who is clustered in low-paid roles, and who is able to move into specialist roles, leadership roles, and senior decision-making, and whether the structure we use supports or unintentionally blocks that movement. This is where the equalities impact becomes real. If women, colleagues from ethnic minority backgrounds, disabled colleagues, or those with caring responsibilities are disproportionately represented in roles that are lower paid or in roles with fewer progression routes, then even a reasonable pay multiple can hide deeper inequality. Equally, if our pay arrangements and allowances reward certain types of work without making pathways into that work genuinely accessible, we risk building a system that looks neutral on paper, but produces unequal outcomes in practice. That is why this comparison matters. It gives us evidence to ask, are our pay multiples and leadership pay decisions proportionate when set against workforce profile? Are we seeking pay gaps by gender, ethnicity, or disability? And if so, where in the organisation do they appear? Do our recruitment and promotion pathways create equal opportunity, or do they advantage those with particular networks, flexibility, or prior access? Our people need to know that when we say we are serious about equality, it includes the hard stuff like pay, progression, and senior reward. So today, I'm simply asking colleagues to note a set of ratios which will be presented by officers. I am asking that we treat this benchmarking as a tool that strengthens our equalities agenda by informing fair policy, targeted development pathways, inclusive recruitment and promotion, and importantly, transparent decision-making. If we get this right, we do not just protect reputation, we improve retention, widen the pools of future leaders, and create a workplace where every colleague can look at the system and feel that this is fair and I can progress here. That is the outcome we should be aiming for. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Priestley. Ronnie Davidson, please.
Thank you, Chair. So the pay policy statement sets out Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes fire authorities' approach to pay, and this needs approved annually. The purpose of the pay policy statement is to provide transparency with regards to the authority's approach to setting the pay of its employees.
The pay policy statement sets out the authority's pay policy for the period starting the 1st of April 2026. Updates have been made to the establishment figures in section 5 and the last confirmed pay awards in section 7. Pay multiples in section 11 have also been updated in line with the latest data. There are also updates to section 13 on the pension abatement. The pension section has been clarified to explain the annual pension increases are applied once a year in April. And I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Do you have any questions on this statement? The recommendation of the executive is that the pay policy principles and statement as set out in Appendix 1 as the statutory pay policy statement for 26-27 is approved for publication. All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you. Moving on to page 169, item 11, Safety Centre funding agreement. I'll move straight to Barry Ackersley, who's going to present this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members, for your time. This paper seeks approval for Bucks Fire and Rescue Service to enter into a new 4-year partnership and funding agreement with the Safety Centre, which is also known as Hazard Alley. It covers the period from April 2026 until March 2030, where the annual contribution will increase from £25,000 to £50,000. There were 3 main drivers for increasing the level of funding. Firstly, inflation has substantially eroded the real terms value of the long-standing £25,000 contribution, which has remained static for many years. Second, the centre scope for delivery has also expanded. This includes new learning scenarios and outreach models, and which directly support the wider safeguarding and our prevention work. And finally, there continues to be strong strategic alignment with the prevention framework and our responsibilities. The centre engages approximately 20,000 young people each year, with around 12,000 of whom are from Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes. So finally, members should also note the risks associated with maintaining the current funding level or withdrawing the support altogether. These include reduced access for schools, diminished influence over safety messages that are being delivered, loss of our prevention capacity, and the potential destabilisation of a long-standing partner organisation. Again, thank you for your time and happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Councillor Sherwell, Councillor Bailey, and who else have we got? Councillor Wilson, Councillor Lancaster.
Thank you, Chairman. It will come as no surprise to people that have heard me speak on this subject before at these meetings that I fully support this recommendation. I think what the Hazard Alley does, especially in its work with children, is massively important, and it is real value, and I have no doubt about that at all. My question is that there was a planned visit for Fire Authority members back in December, which was cancelled, which I couldn't have gone to anyway because of my disposition at the time. Is the plan for that visit to be reinstated? Because members of this committee that have not been there, I think it would be a valid use of time.
Barry, you carry on.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. In short, yes, it would be our pleasure to take you around the Safety Centre just to show you the good work it does do. So I can follow that up, but yes. Thank you.
Yeah, I endorse that. I'm very anxious that we do have a visit.
Thank you. As always, absolutely in support of this funding. It's a fantastic resource. I think I just note, from the figures presented on page 171, it's geographically located in Milton Keynes, so you would expect Milton Keynes to benefit. I think it would be really nice to see the facility promoted wider in Buckinghamshire, so we can, especially with the outreach, if those people are going out to Buckinghamshire, so that there's wider participation across the county. So perhaps the service can do more to promote that through social media channels and to schools.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey. I can assure you they are. My own granddaughter had a visit to her school, so it certainly comes into Buckinghamshire. But I agree. I think in a related point, I'd just add that I'd like to see more funding for the safety centre coming out of Buckinghamshire, because there seems to be a greater proportion of funding coming out of Milton Keynes. So that's something that I think we can all jointly work on.
Thank you, Chair. Again, just to advocate for what the Hazard Alley does, it's a phenomenal place. I think it's a great partnership that we've got with them, and I welcome that we're increasing it by at least 100%, giving them more funding. I think it has been static for a few years. 25 grand does not get you far in an annual year these days. But I think as well, the elephant in the room with the Hazard Alley is that it is starting to become dated, and it's through no fault. It's just a case of it could be a lack of funding, or it's being able to keep up with ever-growing times. So as a fire authority, and I guess it's something that we could bring back to our councils to ask if we can look at supporting places for educational purposes to make sure that they're keeping up with the time of what's happening. Because, for instance, last time I went there, I saw a Sky remote that was from 2003. Last time I used Sky was probably not to that standard of that remote. So it's a case of making sure that it's up to new requirements of what's happening in newer estate areas, houses that are obviously coming into here. I welcome that we've got knife crime workshops that are coming into there. Of course, none of us want that, but it's one of those that we have to look into, working with other partners such as Thames Valley Police when it comes to that as well. So, and Tracy pretty much stole my thunder by asking about making sure that we can advocate for them a lot more on social media. So is there anything that, as a question to all of us, that we can do to be able to make sure that the educational outreach, which is dramatically improved in Milton Keynes, that we can do towards Buckinghamshire as well?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Lancaster. I'm sure we will do all we can as individuals, and I particularly welcome your suggestion of approaches to councils, that our two councils, that they see what they can do. Councillor Wilson, I think, is next.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm grateful to Councillor Bailey and Councillor Lancaster for raising a point that I was actually going to pick up. I think the issue, as someone who represents a ward right on the Berkshire border, Buckinghamshire being a very long, thin county, the challenge schools have is the cost of getting to Milton Keynes. And so I have a proposal for the authority to consider, and that would be part of our grant should be earmarked as a grant funding for schools to be able to access transport. Because when I speak to the head teachers of our local primary and secondary schools, they'd love to do more trips, but they just can't afford the cost of coaches to get students to those locations. And so I would like to propose, and I don't have a number in my head, but a proportion of this funding is earmarked as a grant funding in some way, shape or form, so that more distant schools, Councillor Hussein's, whether it's Wickham or Stokenchurch or down in our neck of the woods, can get there, because the schools just can't afford to get the students to Milton Keynes.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. It's a very valid and interesting point. I wonder if you would be content that we perhaps first of all have a conversation with the recently appointed new director and see what their input might be before we make that decision, and that we look ourselves at what the actual geography, so that we don't have competing interests saying, well, they got the money and my school didn't. Would that be a way forward?
So it's a slightly separate point in terms of whether what we can explore with the safety around the grant, but just to give you a bit of confidence, whilst it's a really, really important part of our education arm, one of the things we have done in recent months is reintroduce our own school visits. So our crews are now going back out and working to a really, strong NFCC package in primary schools, delivering some safety education. So what we are seeking to do is plug some of those gaps. So potentially where the geography makes it challenging to get to safety centre, or potentially if cost is, kind of prohibitive for certain families and schools, we are trying to make those two things fit together in terms of the provision from safety centre and what our crews will do. So it's probably just useful to know that. And apparently they're being received really well.
Councillor Wilson, you want to come back on?
I don't know the answer to your question, Chairman, in that I don't know what the safety centre will have identified the additional funding. They may already have said, well, we're going to take that for X, Y, and Z. My point is, if we want to achieve the outreach in Buckinghamshire, we have to include the whole of Buckinghamshire. And therefore, we need to consider how those of us in the south of the county can access some of the educational resources. And there may be, as Mr. Buchanan says, some alternative arrangements that could be made, but I'd like to have a solution for the south of Buckinghamshire that can deliver similar fire prevention, fire safety concerns.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Wilson. I think it's best that we take that away and come back with a properly researched consideration for a future meeting, but it doesn't alter the need to do it. There's no question of that. Councillor Banks.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, one solution, perhaps, if you've got a new director of the centre, is to look at resources that could be applied in schools instead of the kids attending the centres and being part of workshops and so on and seeing the resources available, actually to produce videos. I mean, obviously, if it's going to take from Councillor Wilson's area an hour to get to the safety centre, you've got an hour lost of educational content, and maybe before that, or as part of the engagement, is to produce high quality videos, or maybe recordings of sessions. I know those are difficult if they include children, but I think if you could get something like that done and give those to the schools, that could solve Councillor Wilson's problem.
Your points are noted, Councillor Banks. Councillor Nicknam Hussain.
Don't want to go on too long, but just developing along that theme. I mean, kids with videos of whatever. But I think the new director may look at new outreach, and also can he also look at, as has been mentioned, 25,000 being almost frozen, whether we could look at inflationary increase every year, or a slight cost increase every year, if we wish, if he recommends it. That's all I'm saying.
Councillor Hussain, my recollection from the report is that that was the point of increasing beyond what the inflationary increase would be, was to reflect the fact that this is a 5-year agreement, and we're kind of partially looking at inflation to date and partially looking ahead. But again, I think our support for this facility and our desire to spread its benefits are a given, and I encourage the officers to work on that with ourselves to take things forward. Councillor Stutchbury.
Yeah, thank you. Opportunity. Yeah, I'm looking at this centre business, taking on board the points made about the geography of Bucks, which are very well made, which the Chair said we're going to go and look at. When you look at this report, and we all sit in different places and do different things. The violence against women and girls section in it resonates with me strongly. Having with my colleague Wilson took that through Bucks last session of council to get that move forward in the council sense to do with safety of people travelling in taxis, and the council then amended it to improve it to do with facilities. I'm also in saying that, I note that in Bucks it was the report on CSEs, which Councillor Gong and I worked on 10 years ago. That's now 10 years old, and question that authority about whether it's time to review that, because when Philip and I were looking at it, it was a very different world. So these risks continue. And then when you come to priorities you reach out for STEM children, I think that's ever much in the news at the moment, special education need, and the government's coming forward with proposals in the autumn to how to do that. And we can all play a part in all of those things, which are all high risk, very conscious, some are difficult to talk about, but the reality is we ignore them, they don't go away, my knowledge says so. If we're not outreaching across Buckinghamshire in the way that we'd like to, there's a diminishing return. And when we concentrate on children, I think actually I think a lot of adults need educating around all these risks, quite frankly. We always want to put it down onto the children and the teachers and the education, but I think some of the elderly groups and other parts of our community perhaps need some education on SEND, SEN education. They probably need educating on the principles of white ribbon. They probably need education on CSEs because they read it in the paper, but we're all part of one community. So I congratulate the report, but I am worried that if we're not hitting all the children and adults in Buckinghamshire, and let's not miss out the adults, there's defining characteristics in Bucks and everywhere it's changing. So we need to support that. So I worry about that. I know those points I made are meant to be heard because they're all things that I can evidence based that I've been involved in. So how we wrap that into this, Chair, I don't know. But the points about getting to everybody in Buckinghamshire, and lastly, I'll repeat it again, including adults in this education. If we don't educate the adults, we can't expect the children to teach their parents, can we?
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. I'd remind you that we are a fire and rescue service, not the answer to all the problems that we face in our communities, but we do work with the more mature end of the community through the prevention service. So we do some good, particularly good work there. Do we have any more questions or any comments? The recommendation is that a 4-year partnership and funding agreement with the Safety Centre, Hazard Ali, from the 1st of April 26 to 31st of March 2030, funded at £50,000 per annum, total 200,000 over the lifetime of this agreement, be approved, and that the heads of terms and Appendix 1 be approved. All those in favour? I thank you. That's moving to item 12 on the report on page 183, report on the annual delivery plan, which I think is going to be brought by Anne-Marie Carter.
Thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon. This paper seeks to gain approval of the 2026-27 annual delivery plan. We've continued with the same structure as last year, as this approach has served the service well by providing a clear and robust 1-year view, specific and measurable actions to drive delivery, and a strong and consistent link back to our 2025-2030 CRMP. In developing this year's plan, we've reviewed a wide range of information, including the risks and actions outlined in the CRMP, last year's annual delivery plan and any lessons learnt, our HMIC report and learning from others and their reports, the FBU improvement agenda that is being presented after this, and our corporate risk register. The teams have been working together to identify the key priorities for 26-27 across both our objectives and enablers, and a summary of these can be found on our plan on page 195 of your pack. I'd like to draw your attention to a few notable projects within this year's plan. The continued development of our local training facility, collaborative work with our Thames Valley Fire and Rescue partners on the replacement of our command and control system, continuing with our on-call improvement programme, and a number of evaluations across both our objectives and enablers, ensuring we understand what is working well and where further improvements are needed. It is also worth highlighting that we will receive our next HMIC FRS report during 26-27. While we hope for a positive outcome, we will ensure that any areas for improvement are incorporated into this delivery plan as required. As always, progress against our plan will be monitored and scrutinised monthly through our internal governance arrangements, with an annual report brought to members. The annual report for 25-26 will be presented at the June Fire Authority meeting. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Anne-Marie, for that. Do you have any questions to the annual delivery plan report? Councillor, carry on. Yes, sorry. Was
Sorry,
the
I
only
didn't
hand
hear
up?
my name. Yeah, thank you, Anne-Marie, for the paper. One thing that I thought I might have found in there was the word cadet. We don't seem to have got any inclination to start our recruitments perhaps earlier than taking in apprenticeships at the age of 18. So I just wonder why we aren't sort of moving something towards having a cadet cadre being created. And one small point in the glossary, I had to look it up online, is the FFSIU. It's not in the glossary, it's the Fire Forensic Science Investigation. But really, my main point is about lack of measure of cadets.
Thank you, Councillor McLean. Barry Ackersley's going to come back on that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll just bring your attention to on the prevention. We've got the development of youth inclusion, which is actually captures the cadet and everything around that. We haven't got it up and running yet, but the prevention team is doing some really good work, but it falls under that umbrella.
Thank you. Good positive answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's a really good delivery plan in the sense that it has a whole range of areas, Anne-Marie, that, you know, the fire service is currently working on. My query and my comments really is related to the comms and engagement side of things. And I note that we tend to put comms and engagement in one basket. And actually, yes, they are very much related, but they are quite separate in terms of what they intend to do. And I know that we have a really robust communications strategy and plan because I've been in touch with Ronnie, Emily, and other key officers. My query really is around the engagement aspect and what we are doing in terms of, number one, raising our profile as an authority in the community. And I'm saying this with parentheses because actually that could mean different sorts of communities. I think it was Councillor Banks that raised the fact that we are a public-facing authority. Whilst our major focus is saving lives and fires, there is that secondary, much more interactive role that I think we should have with our communities in terms of presenting ourselves on a regular basis to ensure that we understand and we've got our finger on the pulse of what is going on within our communities relating to fire and well-being, if you like. So I guess my thought is, we have a dedicated resource for comms. What about engagement? Where are we with that? And having said that, I note that we do have one or two officers within the authority that are doing things. But what I'm talking about is more around outreach, creating that cyclical presence so that people know we are there and how we're going to resource that within the authority. Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Anne-Marie.
Anne-Marie, do you want to come back on those points?
I will make a start, and if others wish to come in, I will hand over. I think you make a good point. Emily and I have had lots of conversations about splitting out comms or not splitting out comms, because actually comms and engagement is important across the whole of the plan. So she does have interaction across all 6 areas in terms of what does I think you're right. It's not just what we communicate, but it's kind of the engagement for me is that two-way street of how we interact and kind of get feedback to make a difference, to maybe make a change. So I think that's something that we are working on. I'm not sure I have the detail right now to be able to give you the full ins and outs. There is a community, an engagement framework that we're looking at that is just trying to provide a bit more structure to why we're engaging with the teams we're engaging with them. And that's about a productivity piece, because we go from a recruitment perspective, there is no point continuing to engage with the same groups if we're trying to diversify. We need to make sure we're kind of going, actually, maybe it's better to put the resource there. So that's part of that engagement framework, is to kind of challenge ourselves of why we're going to what we're going to, and if we've got some gaps. That's probably the best I can give right now, and we can definitely get Emily to provide you some more information. I don't know if there's anybody else wants to come in.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Priest. I know we've discussed community engagement on a few occasions, and we have had meetings with our head of comms, Emily Hilling. As Anne-Marie points out there with the community engagement framework, that's obviously something we want to get up and running as soon as possible. On the recruitment side of it, I think Anne-Marie hits a really key point there, that there's no point going out to recruit to the same recruitment campaigns we've done in the past. It's about widening that scope and widening our engagement with the community. So I'm very coming at it from the angle of recruitment, similar to the response we talked about earlier, that the recruitment aspect of it is not just a case of, you know, turning up at certain events at certain times of the year. It's doing something bigger than that, and working with our comms team and yourself to broaden that, you know, that communications plan.
Councillor Lancaster.
Chair, just
Sorry,
on that
Councillor
point,
Wilson.
where it mentions about the annual delivery plan on page 183 supports the delivery of services, objectives and enablers. It doesn't actually specifically say anything about engagement or communication. So what we're saying is all words at the moment. Is there a way of just being able to implement as part of those action points that we actually are going to go and do that?
Doug.
Yeah, I think they're fair challenges in terms of how it manifests in the plan. One of the, two of the key sort of touch points, I suppose, for engagement are around prevention and protection activity ultimately. So from a protection perspective, last time out, the HMI found an area for improvement for the service around our business engagement activity. We have done an awful lot of work, both in terms of the protection team and our communities engagement team, in developing a business engagement framework. And I think we will be able to illustrate again, you know, with the HMI coming back shortly, that our reach now around protection education is really positive and going in the right direction. From a prevention perspective, I know Councillor Priestley sort of talked about that kind of, I suppose, corporate presence, if you like, but alongside that, one of the, and maybe it could be worded a little differently, but one of the items for this year's prevention activity is very much about the maturity and the enhancing of that prevention community engagement comms plan. So we already do it. There is a load of great work goes on with the prevention team, the station staff, trying to get out into the community. But there's something about linking, improving our linkage between our kind of corporate position and our station level plans. So what do those station level plans look like, and how does that play down to individual objectives? That's the bit of work for this year. So it's there, but maybe it could be a little clearer as to what we're seeking to achieve.
Just
going
to support what Doug said. I think it's happening, but it's been happening in sort of silos and not coordinated from a more corporate perspective. So we know the crews have real pride in going out and doing their events in their community. What we probably haven't done well enough is capture it and coordinate it and then report on it. And that's what Emily's really trying to do with this new community engagement framework. It's capturing what we're doing and making sure we are hitting all the communities, that when there's no gaps. But we know we can do more, don't we? You know, we are still really ambitious about making sure we are still represented at a lot of community events, particularly in sort of more diverse communities. But that's what that engagement framework will hopefully seek to address.
I think Councillor Lancaster, did you want to come back?
Yeah, just on that point, I think it's great to hear that again. It goes back what I'm just saying. It's all words. It's not obvious from this report that we're actually looking at doing that. Just thinking if we can have it as a bullet point at the beginning, just to be able to make the public have that reassurance that is something that we're looking at being able to do. Because I've seen it myself, but we're councillors, we will go to events and we'll see it happen, but we need the general public to have that belief and the faith, and to know that the communication is key. Again, social media is a very good platform to be able to do that, to know that this is happening, basically.
Thank you, Councillor Lancaster. I think those points are well noted. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chairman. I wanted to pick up a point that I think is maybe missing, but yeah, I'll take it on from officers whether it is or isn't. The report on page 205 references our audit plan, and it talks specifically around internal audits. For those of us lucky enough to be able to stay for the second meeting this afternoon, then we will hopefully find out from KPMG where we are on the journey in terms of moving towards a clean and unqualified or undisclaimed audit. But obviously the reason for having to put the meeting in this afternoon is because we're working against a regime of local government backlog of financial accounts. We have to get it signed off by the end of February. And, you know, from the conversations I've had with the external auditors, with Mr. Hemming, you know, I think we're in a good place, but we're in the hands of KPMG. And, you know, I think one of the things we should be aspiring to is to be at the front of the pack when it comes to getting out of the woods, as many local authorities and fire authorities are in terms of their accounts. And I have a lot of confidence that we are. So having a clean audit in terms of our plans, I think is quite a good aspiration. And I'd be interested, you know, to see Mr. Hemming's view as to whether or not that should form part of our annual delivery plan.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Mark, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good point. I think the fact we refer to internal audit in the plan only is because that's kind of just the discretionary part in terms of we kind of external audit gets done to us, whereas we commission internal audit, we come up with a plan. But yeah, I think adding a sentence in there about kind of our ambition and kind of to be at the front of getting kind of the backlog issues resolved, I think we can come up with a form of words just to go on that page would be good.
For the benefit of this authority meeting, I do ask our external auditors about our finance team, and they assure me that they are getting support over and above they would get from other fire services. So our guys are doing a great job.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. That particularly your last point, I'm sure that's greatly appreciated by the team involved. Do we have any more questions? Councillor Stutchbury. Can I just mention no desire to extend the meeting or crop it short, but I'm conscious that we have another meeting for a number of the members this afternoon, and also I have a train to catch. So though I have made arrangements for the meeting to continue in my absence should the need arise. Councillor Stutchbury.
Yeah, thank you. I hope you catch the train, Chair, and get to where you got to get to. But we are in a meeting and we do ask questions. Your Majesty, item on a Majesty Inspectors of Constabulary, Inspectors report. Doesn't say in here one of the key things in that, because we've just gone through a communication which has just finished called a consultation. It was a strong point in that communication strategy in the report, correct me if I'm wrong, about the insufficiency of on-call fire service. And I believe we communicated that through the chief's communications to the consultation. But you sit and watch these things, don't you? And then you know, I was never always surprised that even though there was the factual information out there for communications, that some of the information put back to on the other side ignored our communications on what a consultation would mean, to do with station number staff, and to do whether anyone would actually and imply that something contrary to what we were putting out there. So being generous, what did we not communicate in our communication and the consultation which allowed organisations to communicate a different message to the availability of staff post consultation and the use of services in fire service, in the sense that implying that use of engines, use of how staff would be post consultation, and attendance times to fires, which all seem completely inaccurate and were not and we're not in keeping with what we put out in our communication and consultation. So I wonder what we could have done differently to have made it more understandable for people on the outside to not draw alternative conclusions.
It's this difficult one to respond to. I think the point is we can't second guess what the public are going to say. We publish our information on the best guess as to the information, the best understanding of the information that we have. How people interpret that is not, I don't think there's any criticism. I don't think you were implying any criticism of the way the information was being presented. But it is difficult for us to second guess how people are going to respond to it. If any of the officers would like to add to that, then I'm happy for them to do so.
Only to say, I mean, obviously, in relation to the annual plan, we have referred to the fact that we are going to be moving in and focusing on the on-call improvement programme, and obviously the results of the consultation and whatever the authority then go on to propose, we will take forward. But I think, just as the chair said, the officers and the team spent a huge amount of time and effort, not only data crunching, getting the information right, but also trying to present it in a way to the public that was palatable and consumable, if you like. And I agree with the chair. I think how people choose to interpret what we think are quite clear facts and figures in there, it is a matter that we unfortunately can't control.
Absolutely no fault meant or criticism meant about the communication. I was just astonished that you could read one piece of information and how organisations can construct a different information based upon the professional information in it. I don't know what we learn from that, but I think it learns us that buyer beware, I think, when communicating information to external sources, that but it is alarming, because I looked at the report and the work that was done and thought what a good job they've done in communicating that information. And I'm dyslexic and I understood it. So I was really surprised that other outside organisations couldn't understand it and misinterpreted it and actually made analyses that were untrue. But
your point is well made, Councillor Addo.
Chair. Quick one. Just looking at the file, we're looking at communication, engagement, reaching out to, to the public and maybe young people. I just want to sort of suggest I'm putting Daisy Griffiths on the spot here. She's an undergraduate into national relations student, local person. Maybe, opportunity for the officers and us to get somebody like this to find out, what does she think after this meeting about reaching out to younger people? How do we do it better? Social media, maybe hear from somebody like her. She might know other people that might be able to work even with the centre in NK to see how we go about that. So she will be actually having a session with our CFO sometime soon, next week. Right. And so maybe it's opportunity we have a younger person in the room, yeah. For the sake of others. Yeah. So, yeah.
I'm 32. Well, how you know?
Yeah.
Do we have any further questions to raise on the annual delivery plan? No? Then the recommendation is that the annual delivery plan 26-27 be approved by the authority. Those in favour? Agree. Of the document. The reformatting of the document in line with corporate branding before publication is delegated to the Chief Fire Officer. Agreed. (211) item 13 on your agendas. Member update on the FBU improvement agenda for 2025. I think this is going to be taken by the Deputy Chief Fire Officer, Simon Tuffley.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. Good afternoon, members. So I'm going to provide an in-year update on the FBU improvement agenda for 2025. Obviously, it's presented for noting, but I just want to pull out a few highlights before we open up the questions. So we've made some strong progress across several commitments this year. First of all, we've strengthened our maternity, adoption and parental provisions, extending support up to 52 weeks. So this is a really positive step forward in creating a workplace where families can thrive, reducing barriers around starting a family and returning to operational roles. And we're helping to attract and retain more women across the organisation and also addressing some of the health and safety concerns which have been raised by the Fire Brigades Union. We've also strengthened our water rescue capability with funding secured for Module 2 training from 26-27 in a controlled environment, and that is to mitigate the risks that we were experiencing from water pollution in our rivers. Work also continues on developing the Westcott training facility, which I know you're all aware of, and that will play a major role in future operational preparedness. We've increased the day crewing establishments at our day crew stations to 12 per station, and a full policy review of the day crew system is planned during the life of the CRMP to ensure that that model continues to meet risk and demand. We've also upgraded incident welfare provision on appliances and progressed to provide a dedicated welfare appliance to support crews at longer duration incidents. And you'll also be aware that we've conducted a full site appraisal of High Wycombe, focusing on the elements raised by the FBU around decon compliance, modern welfare standards, and future operational needs. Some areas of the improvement plan are still dependent on national pay discussions and wider resourcing, such as skills payments and standard crewing ambitions. And our long-term desire for this improvement agenda is still to bring you a jointly authored end-of-year report, which we brought back to members in June 2026. And I know that Councillor Bailey, you asked that there was a jointly authored report for the final paper. So I have spoken to the FBU Brigade Secretary. He cannot make it here today, and he said that he is more than happy to meet with any councillors if you've got any specific questions that you would like to follow up with the FBU. So the recommendations to note to report, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Simon. Councillor Bailey and then Councillor Stutchbury.
No questions as such. I'm really pleased that the report was jointly authored with the FBU, and there's obviously been some really great improvements. It is just a shame that somebody from the FBU isn't here, because it would have been really, really nice to hear their opinion, but if they were not available, I guess they were not available.
Councillor Stutchbury.
Yeah, follow on from Councillor Bailey, I'm disappointed the FBU aren't here. This was primarily their thing, that what they brought to us in 2023. I was keen, as Simon knows, that we brought some interim stuff to this meeting to show our genuine goodwill towards the policies. I also note and know that they are going to work on the joint report, which you've mentioned. But it's this isn't for engagement purposes, was meant to be how it be. I'm just disappointed they're not here. They could have spoke about these things, informed members about their view on the journey which we're all on. And I thought it was buried in so many different bits of paperwork that I'm grateful for Simon bringing it together and collating this piece of work to have it in one place, so that it's easier for members to see where we're getting to, and then hopefully in June we can look at the pinch points where we've got to progress. So it's really a thank you for doing the work you've done, and we spoke about it on several occasions, and you've delivered the interim action. So thank you for that, and I look forward to the full report in June, where hopefully the FBU will attend, and then they can work through these points within the report with the members.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. I do think it's good to note that whilst we can have disagreements on some areas, we are able to work very closely with the FBU and deliver some very comprehensive benefits for our members. Councillor Edo.
Thank you very much, Chair. I know we're very strong on our people policy and how we support our officers, but just on the spur of the moment, I just thought, what if we have two officers or even management, admin, and an officer on, needing parental leave? How do we manage that? Have we ever had a situation like that where, there's pregnancy or maternity entitlement and an entitlement for the father? How do we manage that? If we have, encountered that, and if we haven't, do we have plans for that?
Ronnie Davidson, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Really good question. It's something I need to take away and look at previous cases that may have been involved in that sense, but we would deal with it on a case-by-case basis and make sure that we are being fair and reasonable in all circumstance. So if we can take that question away and we'll consider that in a bit more detail and look at what we've done historically and what we could do moving forward. That's all.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's worth noting for those of us that were at the Executive Committee last week, on item 6, standard crewing, their last point, I think they're at variance with what we discussed last week. Robin, you certainly picked up on this, and Simon, you certainly spoke at Executive. Yeah, I mean, I would find that quite hard to agree to. Personally, and I think if we can actually crew on-call appliances and have them available by utilising spare firefighters, I think that's a positive thing, as we discussed at the Executive Committee.
Yeah, no, thank you, Councillor Hall. Yeah, we did discuss that at the Executive. I think that's I think where we agree with the FBU is that we wouldn't want an over-reliance on whole-time resources propping up on call. We want a sustainable on-call service and we want a sustainable whole-time service, but they do work across each other through mixed crewing arrangements, and we do want to keep those options where we make the most positive impact in terms of resourcing and availability, where we need to maintain that choice.
Any further questions to the report? For that report, are we happy to note that update report? Agreed. Just to the end of our agenda for today, other than to note that the next formal meeting of the authority is scheduled for Wednesday, the 10th of June, 26 at 11 a.m. Thank you today, which is appreciated. I've got 5 minutes to spare if you want to go on.